If you start with the experience that you want the user to have in classic IDEO terms and work your way back, then what you build it'll be three things. It'll be viable, feasible, and desirable. It'll be all three of those. So it works for the business. It's actually possible to get it done from whatever logistics and engineering feed, and the people participating will think this is great. That's the three standards. And it's kind of like, that's the whole point of this book is if we think about HR as a design opportunity, then you can design experiences that work for the business, work for the individual, and win. That's what the subtitle is: to create a winning organization by being intentional in how you do things.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by John Foster, who has served as a Chief People Officer for the companies such as TruePill, TrueCar, Hulu, and IDEO. He's also the founder and principal at Gamut Labs. In the episode, we discussed the 5 essential ingredients to build a truly human-centered organization and why we need to start from scratch and rethink HR. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Welcome to the show, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. Nice to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Twice in a week. I feel like you're going to be sick of me soon. Too many times.
I can never get too much of talking about this stuff. So actually, yeah, it's fun to geek out a little bit.
No worries. Tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and your journey to where we are now.
Okay, well, I like to describe my career kind of in 3 chapters. And I think I'm in chapter 3 now, but maybe it's burgeoning on chapter 4. I'm not sure. But my early career was really about leadership development and learning. I spent a lot of time with individual growth and individual development. So I got my schooling. It's where I got my 10,000 hours of repeating something over and over again, doing team building and that kind of leadership coaching and things like that. And along the way in that work, I started to really realize that the context matters a lot if people are going to succeed. So I kind of got really interested in org development and had a lucky break to move into HR, which was my story we can talk about when I got dared in a bar to join an HR team. And that led me to working in, very large companies in classic HR organization development roles. And eventually then I shifted gears into smaller companies to have more of a design influence on them. Notably at that time, I worked at IDEO as my first head of HR job. I was there for 5 years and really call that my kind of PhD in design thinking, even though they don't really have that degree. And then the last chapter has been all about working in venture. I've worked full-time and as an advisor and in projects in all kinds of different ways and formats because venture is so volatile and unpredictable. But yeah, that's where I'm in today. I'm still continuing to do design, build, scale work in venture.
Amazing. You sugarcoated over a lot there, so I want to go back. So when we first, well, you said you started out doing like summer camps and stuff like that, right? Like take everyone back there. Because
actually, I mean, my first, I've had 2 really interesting first jobs that I don't really talk about much. One was an internship in sales. So I got trained as a salesperson in tech, just door to door selling super microcomputers. And
really? Man.
First job, hard job, literally cried to my manager that I couldn't hit my quota and all that kind of stuff. And then I also spent a couple of years in construction working with a good friend from college who runs still to this day, a custom home building business. And I learned how to be a carpenter and how to build houses, and building and tech were my 2 kind of roots. And they still come through today. But as I kind of was doing that work, I was pretty much lost as a 20-year-old. I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I know I liked people and I know I liked growth and I liked leadership and that kind of stuff. So I went back to work at this summer camp in Michigan where I had been a camper and a counselor in high school. And I got a job there as a program director. It was a YMCA camp. So I was part of the national YMCA kind of professional network and spent several years working there. And that's where I really got hooked into what I'm doing now, which is, formal leadership development and experiential learning and things like that. So I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, taking people on trips and doing adventures to help them kind of catch themselves, learning about themselves.
Love that. I just think it's funny because if you can tame kids, then you can tame anyone.
Exactly. Yeah, I tell people all the time, like, they say working with executives is hard, but try, a 14-year-old kid from inner city, Detroit. It's a lot more intimidating working with those kinds of kids, I think. And turns out everybody's human, and
Yeah.
you can work your magic. But yeah.
So I know right now you're working on a book, which is very exciting. I know you're in the process of it. Start from scratch. Tell everyone why. Why did you write the book, and also the story behind the name, which I think is great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a labor of love. I realized over the years I was gathering things. I'm a bit of a collector, and I use other people's content a lot when I'm doing management development or leadership or org design. So I read so many books, and gather all these models and frameworks. And over the years, I've built what I call a playbook. So when I'm going into a company, I have sort of 15 to 20 pre-made slides that I already have ready to help. Like when someone says, where would you start? Or they say, how should we do comp? Or they say, how does communication work? I've already done some writing and building around that. And it dawned on me that maybe I could turn this into a book and share it. It's right now it's about 50% done. The idea of start from scratch is really the premise of the book is that companies today need to be built differently with a new model, which I like the word human-centered organization. And I compare that to the traditional organization that we've had for the past, God knows how many thousands of years. It's much more hierarchical, and it's built on the industrial mindset. So start from scratch is the idea that if you want to build a new program, tool, or process inside a human-centered organization, you really have to get to the basic ingredients, and start with really fresh ideas and first principle type thinking, because otherwise you pollute it with things like hierarchical thinking or control and power that aren't intentionally in there, but they change the formula. It's, to me, it's a lot like when you think about cooking. We've spent a lot of time in my household the last couple of years dealing with some fundamental food challenges, and when you realize gluten is in so many things and it can trigger somebody just in a tiny little bit, can really trigger someone's inflammation. It's sort of similar to that. That's where I got the inspiration, is just a tiny bit of hierarchical thinking can ruin a performance management process and make it no longer human-centered.
Yeah,
So
we can certainly relate to that with Bruno, right?
Yep,
So
I am celiac.
we can't hear you on the mic.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, we can hear you on the mic.
Exactly.
Go for it. Yeah. So Bruno's a celiac. So we whenever we go out, I'm like, Bruno, can we even eat here?
Exactly. And suddenly you're super hyper attentive to the basic ingredients and making sure there's not something in there that will, make you sick. It's a really good analogy for how I think a lot of today's organization development and systems and tools and processes are still being built in ways that once you implement them, they tend to take you away from, the natural relationship that we want to build between a manager and an employer, between employees, that's much more reciprocal and a lot less hierarchical.
Is it the same in startups as well? Do you still find that that's still an issue? I can imagine in larger organizations who are trying to innovate and trying to move quickly, or lean principles, etc. They could fall into that trap. Do you also see the same thing with startups as well?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where I realized it. Like, I went from these big companies thinking they're so hard to change because they're just so massive, that if I work in a small company, it'd be easier. And it turns out after 10 years of this, it's actually not that easy, because anything you bring, if you think of the words off the shelf or best practice, those are borrowed from big company thinking. And so, even the startups that are in people tech that are building new tools and processes often end up what I call regressing to the mean. They end up being more normal because their customers that are buying their products are more normal. And so it's really hard to innovate without really starting from scratch and saying, okay, what would be the way this experience should be at the end? What are the characteristics we want? And, I have 5 ingredients that I think make this up. So if you're going to cook, start from scratch in OD, it's recognizing that change is constant and permanent. It's always, embrace the idea that we're building stuff that needs to be fluid and dynamic. It shouldn't be, you're not going to get to a stable point. And startups are always thinking, oh, when we get big, we'll be stable. It's actually, I've never met one that ever stabilizes. The second one is really obvious, but yet super prescient, because I just call it people are not machines. And then I like to put in parentheses, duh, because, it's obvious that we're not machines, but we're treated in the industrial mindset like parts, and human resources and widgets, and the idea, the way we do talent management around roles, not people, it's very machine like. And so we still have things. There's this great book I read called The Extended Mind, by Annie Murphy Paul. Everybody should check it out. It's about thinking about our human body as a system instead of a bunch of parts. Like your brain and your skull is not a CPU. But we still think that way. That's how medicine has been for decades, if not centuries. The third one is culture as a craft. It's something you can make, but it's also something that carries you, like aircraft or watercraft or spacecraft. So if you make it, and it's like a nice double entendre for that one, then leadership is a group outcome. It's not an individual skill. It's something that happens when people work together, and humans are designed to work together. So we lead better when we're collective and we do things together. And finally, the unifying principle of all five is I call talent rules. And talent rules is it rules all the other four. And talent is, in its root word, means an exchange of value. It's not what we think it is. In the old school, like deeper meaning of the word, it's a way of defining value between two things. So like if you had apples and say leather, and you wanted to trade them, you would use talent to mediate that. And so that's what I think is really interesting about the word talent, is if we're trying to get people to do work, they can use talent as a way to describe what they can do. And a company can use talent as a way to describe what they need. And then they can come together and make a match. So those are the 5 ingredients.
I love
in my from scratch.
I suppose the first question that came to my mind is, where do you start? When you go into these organizations, what questions are you asking? What's the process that you go through in order to go, this is where I need to start?
Well, so the next piece of this is that I think there's 5 stages. And the first stage is really about safety. If you want to build an organization that's going to have any functionality at all, people have to feel safe. And, again, HR historically has helped people be safe. We have enforced laws and rules, and, we make sure people get paid so that they're not nervous about their income. We make sure that OSHA rules are followed, and somebody has to wear a yellow vest if you're going to be in a building, in case there's emergencies and all that. It's not the sexiest part of HR generally, but it's the fundamental basic. So you start there. My first audit with a company is, are people feeling safe? And today, of course, thanks to Amy Edmondson and her work with psychological safety in the Fearless organization, we can say, okay, there's more to safety than physical. It's also emotional and other things. So that gets into DEI and belonging and all that. But that's the base level. Next level up is productivity. Are people actually able to get their work done? In the Gallup terms, do I have the tools and resources to get my work done? Lots of companies don't have that in place yet. So you do that. And then you get to the third level, which we talk about a lot, is engagement. And that's a really hard level. So I think most companies probably are at minimum viable with productivity and struggle to get past that. Revenue per employee kind of stuff. And then engagements, where you get into this whole quiet quitting thing that's going on right now. It's fascinating to me that we're discussing the fact that someone could just meet expectations and not be good enough. That's back to the hierarchical thinking of ratings. Meets expectations is considered C work. If you use the standard curve. And actually, a great relationship meets expectations. If you have a contract, you're designed to meet the contract. You're not designed to exceed it. No company I know would overperform a contract. Yet they're asking employees to overperform expectations, and that's so polluted. So we have to pull that all apart. That's where engagement really comes in. And then the last 2 are sustainability and transcendence.
How do you describe those 5? Like, how do you when you describe those, how do you describe them?
I think of it like it's like 5 I don't know, bars, like a sound monitor where you're looking at all the different like bass, treble, and whatever the middle one is. You can have them fluctuate up and down. I don't think they're hierarchical.
Okay.
I think they're probably parallel, or there's probably the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But some people just don't pay attention to the high notes. They never get there. They're just fascinated with thumping bass.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
And I love the analogies you're coming out with, by the way. It's so great to picture it. And in the book, it would be great if you had some like graphics, like visual.
Yeah, so I'm hoping. That's why I need a publisher. So if anybody knows a good publisher, let me know.
I do. So after this call, after this podcast, I will introduce some people. I was going to say it earlier, but there's so many people that I think I want to connect with you. But yeah, it'd be great to see some visual artwork and
Yeah, I'm
representation.
very visual. I mean, that's how I started. The whole thing is just slides. I don't even use words to use this
Really?
most of the time.
Oh, one day
Like
you're gonna
I
have to
have
share
my original
them.
playbook is just visuals.
I don't know if you can give away your secret sauce on the podcast, but one day I'd love to get hold of those slides. Maybe we can do like an adapted version for the show and share them on LinkedIn, because I'm sure.
Well, if I'm smart about it, I'll release them one at a time on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that would be a great way, and incorporate that. I saw something you put on LinkedIn, which kind of goes into this theme. You were saying something along the lines of we're talking about hybrid work, future of work, and you was like, it's dangerous to think and use that language. Can you explain a bit? Do you know what I'm referring to? Can you explain a bit more about why you said that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are getting, it's funny how LinkedIn, the public domain ends up with a lot of polarities. And so, work from home has been a polarity thanks to COVID. It's either in the office or it's at home. And then there's this medium place called hybrid, which sounds like a compromise, but actually doesn't work for anybody if it's one size fits all. I mean, right now, I don't know anybody on the inside at Apple right now, but they've just made a mandate that they want 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And they say it's got to be Tuesday and Thursday, and then you can pick your third day, which is great. That calls flexibility in. But then you look at a different company, Salesforce, and they've created these really cool things called something team agreements, flexible team agreements. And so they're putting the power in the hands of the team to say, when do you want to be here? So if you have that back to the leadership as a group, that to me sounds human-centered. Leadership is a group outcome. So put the 5 or 7 people or 12 people that are on the team in a room and say, hey guys, how should we work? And should we work on Mondays? Do we want to be in person? What's better for you? At that scale, they can solve that problem. But if you try to solve that at the global Apple level, there's just so many different people in their workforce. They have retail people, they have corporate people, they have lawyers, they have salespeople, they have tech people. Coming up with a one-size mandate that you have to be at the office sounds a little draconian to me.
It's kind of like
more subtle.
You might as well not do it. It's at that point you're sending a signal that, one, you don't trust your employees.
Exactly. That's what it starts with, and that's what Salesforce is sending a signal that we trust you as a person to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I always find that fascinating. You trust people to do all these other things, like drive a car. When you drive to work, you don't think someone's going to run you over. You trust people to do their part as an adult in the car. Mm-hmm. But at work, we end up in this is a version of hierarchy, is paternalism. Companies have traditionally, it goes back in ancient time, lords took care of their people. And they treated it, this is like in Adam Smith, like the invisible hand. The invisible hand will help you know what's right because you're taking care of these small people. And it's just so arrogant and so like classic. We just need to pull that away and say, okay, wait, these are all adults working here. They need to be, this is Netflix, promoted this for a long time, freedom and responsibility. You can have some freedom, but you need to do your part as an adult. And if you behave like a child, you'll probably get fired.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We can't punish the many for the few. I think that's the way we've had all of these processes in place and forever, where it's like, let's just focus on, rather than having that, let's have principles. Let's move away from policies to principles and put the trust. And if people abuse that trust, then you can have a conversation. But to say we need to see you 5 days a week or 3 days a week just because, there's no reason. It's just because. My wife's company is the same. She has to be in 2 days a week now. And it's just because, literally. And half the time she goes there, her team's not even in. So she's like, why am I even here?
It seems even worse.
I've just traveled an hour either way, and now she has to get up an hour and a half earlier now to get ready to drop Robin to nursery. She also has to work later and arrange with our nursery. Actually, we have to pay more to the nursery so Robin can be there a bit later just because of those 2 days. So it has an impact, as well. It's different if it was everyone was coming on that day, or it's a collaboration day, and there's a reason. And my team pulled me up on it too. I did the same thing. I made the same mistake early on. They were like, why are we coming in on a Monday just to sit on our laptops, Chris? And I was like, okay, made a mistake. Okay, and now we actually work on projects on Mondays, and we spend time together. We ideate, we solve challenges and problems, help each other on projects that perhaps we're struggling with. And it's a great day to get together as a team. We go to lunch together every Monday. We go to lunch have a picnic outside as a team. There's a reason to be there as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of human-centered design. If you start with the experience that you want the user to have in classic IDEO terms and work your way back, then what you build it'll be three things. It'll be viable, feasible, and desirable. It'll be all three of those. So it works for the business. It's actually possible to get it done from whatever logistics and engineering feat, and the people participating will think this is great. That's the three standards. And it's kind of like, that's the whole point of this book is, if we think about HR as a design opportunity, then you can design experiences that work for the business, work for the individual, and win. That's what the subtitle is: to create a winning organization by being intentional in how you do things.
Yeah.
And I think some companies are really good at it. It's kind of surprising to me in a way that Apple's not so good at it, because they're so good at other types of design. Maybe they are good at it. I don't know. I'm just looking at I should be careful because I'm just reading articles. I don't have anybody on the inside at Apple that's helping me understand what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
There could be lots of reasons behind what they're doing. And I know from working at big companies, like when I was at Hulu, what the press would say about us and what we were actually doing was often way off.
That's another challenge.
Put that asterisk on there. I'm not picking on Apple here.
Yeah.
I just know that I saw two posts, and the PR war, if there is one, Salesforce did a better job with their flexible team agreements than Apple did with their 3-day mandate. Different thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? We're actually doing a show about that tomorrow. So our LinkedIn live show, we do a live show called This Week at Work every Friday and talk about what's happening in the news. And it's interesting because during my research, I just found so many conflicting data points. Like one news site was saying this, another was saying that, and you're like, well, what is the real story here? As well. And that's another thing as HR leaders that in the past wasn't something you really had to navigate. But for example, during COVID, all of a sudden you're thrown into the limelight and you're having to deal with the media, the news, the comms in a whole different way, right? And people are looking, especially when you see the research when during the COVID, there was a lot of research from Edelman that came out talking about how people are more likely to listen to advice on COVID from their employer versus their government. There's a real responsibility now that companies are holding.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, I think that's interesting. I mean, capitalism to me is a source of greatness for all of us because it can be very efficient and very effective in its operating, and people spend a ton of time at work. So when companies think about it that way and say, how can we create an experience that's safe and productive and engaging and sustainable for our team, then we can this is where transcendence comes in. We can transcend the purpose of the organization and do good for society. So helping with public health is a good outcome. That's a transcendent outcome. That's what I mean by that. That's not the company's purpose. It's not the design or intent of the company, but having a positive effect on public health, whether it be smoking cessation or obesity or vaccination, any of those types of things that companies do, that's a transcendent outcome. And that's really interesting because it's probably more efficient to do it that way. I know some of the companies that are delivering on these public health outcomes they want to work through employers because it's a better way to reach people in a convenient on-site or even in their home connection than it is to have them go to like the local sports stadium or their school or something.
Yeah.
So it's
it makes sense.
It's very, very interesting.
When I know you've already rolled out these ingredients in multiple companies now, what would you say was the biggest challenge that you faced?
On the ingredients, engagement, easy.
Like straight away, engagement.
I mean, like safety, everybody gets. We're not always good at it, but I don't think it's hard to explain. Even belonging right now, which is really about psychological and social safety. Productivity, that's kind of the whole point of most business people already. They're already thinking, how can I do more with less and maximize effort? Engagement's the one that's fascinating. I was just on LinkedIn yesterday with somebody talking about, first of all, discretionary effort. What is that? And I think it's where you get into the science of humans deeper, and it's out of business, and it's where you get into that humans are not machines problem. And there was a great post about, if you just ask people what motivates them, you can give them the right kind of feedback and recognition instead of guessing or doing what you'd want. And like, Some people are like, I really want someone just to call me and say, hey, how you doing today? That's recognition. Recognition, the root word is I know you again. So it shows that I actually know you if you contact me and say, hey, how's it going? If you see me in the hallway and you don't know me, or you pretend not to see me, like think about high school, like when you're walking down the hallway and people ignore each other, that's a diss, right? You're being disrecognized on purpose. So recognition really isn't about some perk or gift. It's about knowing somebody. So to me, it's obvious. You just say, what can I do to help you feel excited about your work as a manager? And people management could then be all about doing that. But somehow in the old mindset, in the traditional mindset, that sounds wrong. It somehow entitles people or gets them greedy or so there's this defense about that. And I think that's a big blocker to engagement in a lot of people.
Yeah. It's so interesting, right? Because we do so much more harm by assuming we know.
Yeah.
And even I, just you saying that, I was like, when was the last time I've done that? I just haven't done that recently. It's something I need to do too, and sit down with my team. I used to do it in sales. So in sales, because we had such strong links to sales performance versus incentives, I used to sit down with my team members once per month and ask that same question. And it was normally like, I'm saving up a deposit for a house or a holiday, a dream holiday. And I would link that back to the sales performance. It was very obvious. But I should be doing it with every employee.
That's what human-centeredness is. That's what I mean by a new way of, that's radical in a way. It's not radical at home. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, it's not radical when parents think they know what's best for children. And they do most of the time. I don't find as a parent that I ask my kids all day long, what do you want today? Because they'll say crazy stuff and you're like, can't do that. You got to go to school. So I think that's the idea of paternalism polluting the company. Like if you're designing things that accidentally bring in, this toxic element called paternalism, you end up not doing things that are really obvious. So just to do a shout out on the person who brought this up is Jennifer Dulski. She runs a company called Rising Team. And she has this cool little exercise with a pie chart just to help people remember, you should ask this question. So it's a tool and it's a human-centered tool. And that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, is like, you would only use that if you really cared to engage people. And so engagement is a metric for the company where you do get higher performance. The correlations are crazy when people are highly engaged. It doesn't mean they're going beyond expectations necessarily. It just means they're giving you really good work. And discretionary effort to me isn't extra. It's fulfilling. It's reciprocal. And if I'm complying to do the very bare minimum, then I'm maybe productive, but you're constantly going to have extrinsic motivators. And people are motivated by three main things. They're motivated by growth. They're motivated by the ability to have relationships with others. And they're motivated by the flexibility or the control they have over their lives. So that's self-determination theory 101, really basic to human-centered design, is if you can design flexibility and you can design control and you can design relationships into a job, people are going to be happier and perform better.
Yeah.
That's a really tough nut to crack in almost every company I've been at. A lot of founders feel like they have that paternalistic ownership of the idea of being an owner. Might even be a pollutant. I'm not sure about it, but people say, I want you to be an owner. And it's like, how about be a partner? An owner owns something in a way that means you control it. And I don't know, maybe that I haven't really thought
just
about
the language alone, just the language.
Yeah.
The change in just the language alone sends the wrong message.
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean by the start from scratch piece. You really have to think all the way down to words and what are we accidentally bringing in that's perpetuating the old myth and the old mindset.
Yeah. It's a lot. I think, where do you think technology can help? For example, something like nudges help, nudging leaders, nudging managers,
Sure.
Reminders, because this is something that comes natural.
Habit design. Well, so I think human-centeredness is natural. I think that we have learned, I think it's habit design might be good, but more it's just intentional. It's being intentional and thoughtful and spending energy and recognizing the business value over why would I spend an hour thinking about this versus thinking about something else. And I do think there's a core business responsibility for investors and boards and CEOs to really start thinking, what can I do to give a better return on this business investment we're making? And we're under leveraging human effort. We're actually wasting it. And so that to me is like, it's really a fundamental business question. So where do you start? The same way you do everything else, measure it and say, if I were to do this, would I be better off? And if so, wouldn't I just do it? Because that's how we do everything else in business.
Yeah.
And yes, I need some coaching and some tools and some habit design. But what I think people just haven't spent enough time getting under the surface to think, how did we get here with these tools?
Yeah. I do want to, before I let you go, tell everyone the story of how you was dared to be a HR. I don't want to forget that story, because you was like, I was like, how did you get into HR? Because I normally ask that question during the show. Did HR choose you, or did you choose HR? And your answer was, I was dared to be in HR.
Yeah, I was dared, and I think that means HR chose me, but because I was dared by the head of HR and the CEO. At the time, I was working with Citibank, the New York Consumer Bank, doing this big rollout of training for they were doing a customer-centered change initiative, try to make the bank more customer-focused back in the late 90s. And the company I worked for was doing this rollout, and I was the program leader, and at the end of it, we're literally in a bar after one of our adventure days. And I'm standing there talking to these two guys, and they were like, well, John, this has been great. We love this program. It really makes sense. But what do we do now? Like, how do we make this work back at Citibank? And I kind of was like, are you kidding? Like, that's your question after all this time? You need to behave the way we've been talking about. And then I'd already been thinking, it's not that easy. And they were like, well, if you think it's so easy, why don't you come work with us? And I said, okay, I will. And so like that was like a Thursday night, and I lived in Colorado, and I had, outdoorsy kind of lifestyle. And by Monday, I was wearing a suit in New York City, walking to Court Square and going to work in a business, in a bank.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into HR. And it was a great start.
Love it.
Bill Fisk there was a great HR leader for me to learn what is HR. And
what company was that? Sorry, what company was that?
That was Citibank.
Citibank. No, the company you joined. It was Citibank. It was.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, amazing. What would you say just kept you engaged in HR so long? What keeps you going?
I think it's like performance art. I've tried some different things. I think of myself more as a builder, and that's why writing this book's been an interesting challenge, because I'd rather do it. But then I realized you need blueprints to build something really great. So that's what the book for me is, more of like a blueprint kind of thing, or a guide. But it's a really hard puzzle to solve. Like, people are messy. That's the one thing I learned in graduate school. A guy was one of my professors, Charles F. Luna. He was like, wrote on the board one day, things that matter are messy. And I was like, of course it is. So this is gonna be hard. It's dynamic, it's ever changing. People are messy, organizations are messy. So it's try to get like a really great company operating and humming on its best is just a never ending challenge. And it's like a giant puzzle. And so I'm just intrigued by that. And there's always something more to figure out and learn.
Definitely. And last question, for those on their journey to become a HR leader, to become a chief people officer, what advice would you give to those individuals on their way to sit in the seat?
I think you really have to understand social science and human behavior. And if you want to add value in this function, you have to come to the table with insights and depth and expertise around people and how they work together, because most of the other leaders don't necessarily have that. And then secondly, and probably just as important, is be really interested in business and customer behavior, because HR serves the business. And if the business isn't performing well, you have to help understand, like, well, what can we do to help the business perform better? So having a really solid understanding of how businesses operate and how the power of customer behavior, those three things are probably the most important things to just continue to hone.
I love that. And last thing, where can people connect with you? If they want to reach out, say hello, and also keep track of when the book's launched, where can they follow you?
LinkedIn is best. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, John Foster, Gamut Labs, True Pill, current company I've been at. So you can find me that way. I think it's John Foster Connections or something like that is my actual URL, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure you'll find me.
No worries. For everyone listening, as always, the link's already below. So whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn, the links will all be below in the description, so make sure you go and connect. But John, I'm really looking forward to the book. I think so many of our audience can benefit from that, and I love the fact that it's going to be so practical and you're going to share those blueprints. I'm looking forward to seeing the artwork as well along the way, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and share your experience.
My pleasure. It's really great to be here, Chris. And anytime you want to connect, I'm always up for another chat. So good to be here.
Sounds good. Well, I wish you all the best until we do this again. See you later.
Thank you.